Defining place can be controversial. What one person's definition of place is most likely drastically different from what another person's definition of place is. Place could be a physical location, place could be something figurative, like the phrase, home is where the heart is, place could be constant or constantly changing. The same place described by different people would likely be completely different descriptions. Place can not only be portrayed through what the author or producer intended, but also can be interpreted differently by each reader or viewer. That said, place is versatile. The film Wild and the novel Raising Wild both have common elements of rural areas, hiking, and personal growth. Examining the place of this novel and film will reveal how place is different and similar in these two works. The film The Outsiders and the novel The Motel Life also have notable similarities and differences relating to place. They both include similar actions, similar place in society, and important relationships. Comparing place through different novels and films will reveal elements and roles of place. In the novel Raising Wild, the main character Michael is often hiking. When he first describes how he bought a piece of land in rural Nevada, he mentions that one of the first things he did, even before his house had started being built, was that he had started to hike around the area that would soon be his home. He hikes to become familiarized with this area. He states in the preamble that while he was hiking, he felt the exhilaration of solitude. Hiking acts as a source of information about both his new surroundings and himself. It is obviously important to him, and he passes this important tradition or habit down to his daughters. He enjoys hiking alone, which allows him time to think, but he also enjoys his hiking as a way to bond with his daughters. In this way, place is not the location of the trails he creates, but the feelings and the freedom that he gets from hiking these paths. Hiking is a new way for him to think, and in this way, place is the space that he is able to access in his mind that he can't access anywhere else. In the film Wild, featuring Reese Witherspoon, the main character Cheryl Strayed decides to hike the Pacific Crest Trail, which leads from Mexico to Canada through California, Oregon, and Washington. It is quite an extensive hike, and she does this hike solo. Unlike Michael in the novel Raising Wild, Cheryl is not an experienced hiker when she sets out on this journey. She decides to hike this trail on a whim, without training, and without anyone accompanying her. The Pacific Crest Trail is not just a physical location and journey, but is also a mental location and journey for Cheryl. It is a place that she is completely alone and dependent on just herself. In the past, she had depended on her mother, husband, and drugs, but on this trail, she only has herself to rely on. She has to be independent and strong. The trail was a place that she was alone with her thoughts, just like Michael in Raising Wild. The lonely trails allow and force thoughts that these characters wouldn't confront or consider in any other location. Role is very important to telling a story because place shapes character. Where a character lives, grows up, and travels to changes the character and impacts who that character is immensely. In Raising Wild, Michael grows as a character while he is hiking. This is revealed in the preamble when Michael is hiking and states, "I was a man alone in the wilderness, and in that moment of summit bliss, I imagined there was nothing that I could not see. Only later would I discover that, even from that high peak, what mattered most remained invisible to me." Another example of the role that the hiking trails played in the story was the fact that Michael used the trails and hiking as a way to teach his young daughters life lessons. Again, in the preamble, when his daughter Hannah is hiking, she asks her dad what they will find at the top. He responds to her question by saying, The thing about climbing a mountain is you never know what you'll find at the top. You'll just have to go up and see. Place plays a role by being a medium for life lessons, interpersonal communication, and intrapersonal communication. In the film Wild, the role of place unquestionably shapes the character Cheryl. Seeing Cheryl in her flashbacks, as opposed to when she is on the trail, there are obvious differences in her character. It is revealed that she sets out on this trail to get back to who her mom thought she was. Her mom knew she wasn't perfect, but she thought a lot more of Cheryl than Cheryl thought of herself. She intentionally uses the Pacific Crest Trail to change who she is. Place impacts the character. She learns that she can get through a lot more than she thought she could. The place in this film is not only a location, but also a challenge. It allows Cheryl to confront her demons. She actually had no other choice. She jokes in the movie, saying that she had almost confronted everything she had been avoiding and that she had visited almost every place in her mind. This place, just like in the novel Raising Wild, allows a space to really think, since there is nothing else to do. In the novel Raising Wild, nature acts as an escape and a way to find clarity for the main character, Michael. In this way, place is not a specific location, because he has many different nature escapes. The role that place plays, however, stays the same. It is always an escape for Michael. In the first chapter of the book, Endlessly Rocking, Michael states that, with enough gin and time, all problems are solvable, or at least soluble, capable of being diluted with equal parts distilled juniper berries and seawater. This reveals that the author finds the ocean to be a key ingredient to finding clarity or finding an answer to anything that could vex someone. While it is not for everyone, Michael finds peace in nature and explains that his life's ambition had been to inhabit a place as to provide immediate access to solitude and big wilderness. He wanted immediate access and permanence in a place that he could escape and find clarity anytime that he wanted. He is able to find clarity and escape both in nature by the ocean and in nature in the middle of a desert in Nevada. This just goes to show that for Michael, it did not matter what the landscape was, but nature as a place played a role as an escape and as a way for him to find clarity. In the film Wild, Cheryl has many reasons for going on a long hike, but one of those reasons is that she is trying to escape. When her mother dies, she is lost. Her life seems to be crumbling. She is not happy, and as she's checking out at a supermarket, she notices a book about the Pacific Crest Trail. She was looking for a way out, and that was the first thing that she found. She decides to go on this hike, but while she states that the reason she's going is to rediscover who she is and recreate who she is also attempting to escape her life. She has an okay job waitressing, she seems to have a bad reputation, she is getting divorced and accidentally got pregnant and didn't know whose it was, and her mother has died. Her life doesn't exactly seem like a fairy tale. By going on this hike, she is getting away from everything. She doesn't bring a phone, so no one can contact her from her life. It is revealed that she was interviewed for the Hobo magazine, that she doesn't have a house, her ex-husband has a new girlfriend, or is at least dating again, which is revealed in the film while Cheryl calls him before she sets out on her journey. She basically just sets down everything that is going on in her life and gives up on everything. She goes into the mountains where no one can contact her and where she can be all alone, and she avoids responsibility and life the entire time that she's on her hike. She manages to escape her life completely. Place plays an important role in who people are. In the film The Outsiders, the main character Ponyboy and all of his friends are shaped by the places that influence their lives. For example, Ponyboy and his friends all live in a certain area of town. The houses in this area most likely all cost a similar amount, which means that their parents and their families are all most likely in the same social class. Since they all live in the same area and go to the same school, and their parents all have a similar income and lifestyle, the boys in that place all tend to be very similar, and they create bonds as they grow up. The same thing happens with the socials. It is revealed in the film that the socials are from the South Side. They dress much differently from the Greasers, which is made up of Ponyboy and his friends. Their parents are much wealthier, and because of their similar incomes, they all live in the same area of town and same neighborhoods. They have a completely different way of life simply due to the place that they live and the things that come with that. Just like the Greasers, this place influences them and they form bonds and lifestyles that are very similar to one another. The place influences their identity. Place also shapes people in the novel The Motel Life. Since Jerry Lee and Frank had a rough time growing up, they resorted to staying in motels. This allowed them to meet other people who also had a rough go of it and ended up living in motels as well. Similar lifestyles and situations led these people to the place that they are, which is motels in Reno. For example, Annie James also lives in a motel. She also had a rough upbringing. This just shows that the place was almost a place that brought in a certain type of person. Since Jerry Lee and Frank did live in motels, they had a freedom that the people with monthly rent payments or mortgages don't necessarily have. When they decide to run away, they have very few belongings or things to worry about. The fact that they are transient has changed the way that they live their life. They don't have a sense of permanence in home or in anything else. It also leads them to meet people that people who live in a house would never meet or connect with. In this way, Jerry Lee and Frank in the motel life are shaped by the place that they reside. This is similar to The Outsiders because similar people end up being in similar places and forming bonds, connections, and lifestyles based on the place that they are together. Place is more than just location because the same place over a long period of time changes drastically. In the motel life, the time period is set up through locations instead of just with words. Jerry Lee is describing the location that he ran over a boy, saying, "There was no one around, no phone booth, no store, nothing." This reveals that this story is placed in a time period that phone booths were common in and were relied upon, which is much different than now, at least in Reno. This creates an image of an older Reno and reveals to the reader that the story is not taking place in modern day Reno. Another thing that allows the reader to imagine the time period is that they got in Jerry Lee's beat up 1974 Dodge Fury. This further narrows down the time period. Time period plays an important role in place because it can mean a world of difference to the scene and imagery of a movie or novel. In the film The Outsiders, the visual aspect that is lacking in books really helps to define what time period the setting is in. You can tell by what cars are being driven, what the kids are wearing, and activities that the kids do. You can also see that it is a small town. The kids are smoking cigarettes and they go to a drive-in movie. These are two key factors that reveal to the audience that the story is not set in current-day Tulsa, Oklahoma. This just goes to show that place is not only location, but also time period. The place of this film would be much different if it were set in modern-day Tulsa, Oklahoma, as it would be also much different if it was set earlier in history. In the film The Outsiders, place has another unique role. It is a barrier. It is a barrier between the socials and the greasers. The two groups don't get along. While watching the film, there are obvious differences between the two groups of teens. These differences obviously play a part in their disagreements, but ultimately, place is what divides them. Anyone who lives in the South is automatically a social, and anyone who is born in the neighborhood that the greasers are from are greasers. This is a locational difference that creates a social barrier between the two groups and ultimately causes a lot of unreasonable conflict. For example, Ponyboy and Johnny, who are greasers, meet two girls named Marcia and Cherry, who are socials, at the drive-in. Ponyboy and Cherry seem to be getting along, and one could even imagine that they would begin a relationship in the future. However, after the movie is done, Cherry explains to Ponyboy that if she sees him around school, she probably wouldn't say hi to him. This is strictly because socials don't socialize with the greasers. This is a prime example of how physical location acted as a social barrier. In The Outsiders, Ponyboy and Johnny find themselves in some trouble and decide to run away to hide in an abandoned church. In the movie, the church is shown as a dark, run-down, cold, uncomfortable, and unwelcoming place. It is filled with animals who have also sought shelter there. The church represents the journey that Ponyboy and Johnny are on. They left the comfort of their somewhat simple lives after Johnny murdered one of the socials in self-defense. The church represents the cold, dark, unfamiliar, uncomfortable turn their lives had taken. They were not used to being guilty of murder, and they were not used to the unforgiving church. The church was not simply a church, but also was used as a symbol of the situation the boys had found themselves in. Similar to The Outsiders, the motel life also includes a plot of accidental murder and two boys, or men, seeking an escape from the consequences. In the motel life, the first thing Jerry Lee and Frank do is leave. They first just decide to drive with no real location in mind. Then they come home, and when police start to suspect Jerry Lee, they decide on a more permanent location to escape to. They decide to go to Elko. Elko is symbolic in the motel life, just as the church is symbolic in The Outsiders. Elko seems like a quiet, random place to the average person, but Frank chooses to escape there based solely on the fact that Annie James is there. Annie James was someone he loved. They hadn't ended well, but Frank was nonetheless looking for her. Jerry Lee and Frank needed a fresh start. They needed an escape and a completely new life. Frank knew that he wanted a fresh start with Annie James too, and that if he was getting a do-over, he wanted to be with her. Therefore, Elko represents an escape and a new beginning for Frank and for Jerry Lee, at least in theory. Both stories have a sense of home. In The Outsiders, home is in Oklahoma, in the neighborhood full of greasers. They were an unconventional group, but they were family. They all felt comfortable and at ease together. Their home was not necessarily a house, but was wherever the group was. In the motel life, while Jerry Lee and Frank lived in motels, they still had a place to call home. They didn't necessarily think of their motels as home, but what all of their motel rooms had in common was Reno. Reno was Frank and Jerry Lee's home. In this way, Place was not their physical motel rooms, but rather was the city that held those motels. They had spent their whole lives in Reno before they had to run away. The motel life didn't have a specific location that was home, but was made up of people. Place is versatile. Place can play a number of roles, both in film and literature. Place is not simply a location, it is much more. It can be an escape, as nature was a place of escape for Michael in Raising Wild and Cheryl in Wild. Place can be an escape, such as Elko in The Motel Life or the old church in The Outsiders. Place can be a journey instead of one physical location, as the Pacific Crest Trail was a journey for Cheryl in Wild, as leaving Reno was a journey for Frank and Jerry Lee in The Motel Life, and as running away was a journey for Ponyboy and Johnny in The Outsiders. Place shapes characters. It shaped Johnny, Ponyboy, Cherry, Jerry Lee, Frank, Annie James, Michael, and Michael's daughters, Caroline and Hannah. Place impacts everyone, which was shown by each and every one of these works. Place is more than location in the fact that it includes a time period. Place can represent something and be a symbol to a story. Place can play many roles and has an immense impact on any piece of literature. Place can be, and is, personalized by each author, director, viewer, and reader. Place is powerful.